Imagine this. You are scrolling through Spotify on your morning commute. Or maybe you're out for a run, you've got your headphones in, and you're just trying to get into the zone.
Right. Just looking for that perfect playlist.
Exactly. You hit a playlist, and instead of hearing a brand new track by Taylor Swift or catching the highly anticipated latest drop from Kendrick Lamar, you are absolutely vibing to a hit made entirely by artificial intelligence.
And the kicker is that you probably don't even know it.
You don't, because it is good.
Yeah.
Like, really, really good. The beat drops at exactly the right moment. The vocals have that perfect emotive rasp. The hook is instantly stuck in your head.
Yeah.
You might even click that little heart icon and add it to your permanent rotation without a second thought. Crazy, right?
It sounds like science fiction, but honestly, it is happening millions of times a day right under our noses.
But here is the thing, and this is the real core of what we need to talk about today. What if this massive new wave of AI-created music is exactly why traditional record sales are plummeting right now?
That is the big question.
Yeah. What if this silent flood of algorithmic audio is the exact reason why it feels like we are just not getting any new, massive, globally recognized pop stars anymore? Okay, let's unpack this. Because the music industry is being reshaped right beneath our feet faster than anyone realizes, and it feels like nobody is talking about the real long-term implications for you, the listener.
It is a fascinating premise, and I mean a very urgent one, because we are actively moving away from what used to be a shared musical culture. We're fragmenting into these completely isolated AI-generated echo chambers.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And the mission for this deep dive is to really explore the reality of this shift. We have a massive stack of research to go through today.
We really do.
We are looking at comprehensive 2026 market reports, a major global economic study from CISAC, inside looks at generative AI platforms like Suno and Soundverse, and hard data straight from streaming giants like Spotify and Deezer. We are going to figure out exactly how AI is disrupting the concept of star power and ultimately what that means for the music you listen to every single day.
I am so ready for this, because to really understand how wild this current moment is, we kind of have to rewind a bit. We have to look at the backstory of how we actually got here.
Right, the historical context.
Think about the era of the monoculture. Back in the day, the traditional record labels, your Universals, your Sonys, your Warners, they completely ran the show. They were the ultimate gatekeepers.
They held all the keys to the kingdom, absolutely.
They would handpick an artist out of total obscurity. Maybe they found someone singing in a smoky club or a boy band put together by a producer. Then they would pump millions and millions of dollars into promotions, highly choreographed music videos, and aggressive radio placement.
They basically dictated to the public who the biggest stars in the world were going to be.
Exactly. We all tuned into the exact same radio hits, we all watched TRL after school, and we all went to the mall to buy the exact same CDs.
And to really understand the economics of that monoculture, you have to look at how centralized the revenue streams were back then.
Because there were only so many ways to actually hear music.
Right. The channels of distribution were incredibly narrow.
Yeah.
You had terrestrial radio, a couple of music television channels, and physical record stores.
Yeah.
Because of that bottleneck, there was a forced collective shared focus.
You had to listen to what they gave you.
Pretty much. If a major label decided they were going to push a specific artist, that artist almost inevitably became a cultural icon, simply because there was no alternative media to distract the masses. It was an era completely defined by a top-down creation of superstars.
And the money just concentrated at the very top.
Exactly. The economics supported a few massive winners who took the lion's share of the profits. You had a handful of global icons, and then everyone else was fighting for scraps.
Right. But it did create a shared cultural baseline. Like, if I brought up a Britney Spears song or a Nirvana track, everyone knew exactly what I was talking about. But then the streaming revolution hit, and it completely blew the doors off that centralized model. Suddenly, you didn't have to drive to a record store and spend $15 to see if an album was actually good. Endless music was just sitting there at your fingertips for a flat monthly fee.
It was the ultimate democratization of access. Just to put some hard numbers on that paradigm shift, by mid-2025, U.S. recorded music revenues had hit $5.6 billion.
Wow.
And streaming was making up a staggering 84% of that entire market. We saw paid streaming subscriptions rise to 105 million accounts in the U.S. alone. It was a total irreversible shift in how we consumed audio.
The CD was dead, and the infinite library was born.
Exactly. But having an infinite library creates its own massive problem.
Right, because if I open an app with every song ever made, I just kind of freeze.
Choice paralysis. If you have literally every song ever recorded in human history sitting in your pocket, how on earth do you decide what to listen to on a Tuesday morning?
You just rely on the app to tell you.
That is where the streaming platforms had to innovate rapidly. To prevent users from just getting overwhelmed and closing the app, they introduced curated algorithmic magic. Think of Spotify's Discover Weekly or Apple Music's For You playlists.
Which at the time felt like magic. It felt like the app just inherently understood my vibe.
But it wasn't magic. It was the definitive beginning of data-driven listening. The platform started meticulously tracking your listening habits. Every time you skipped a song after 5 seconds, every time you turned up the volume, every time you hit repeat.
They were just feeding the machine.
They took all that behavioral data and used it to feed you more of what you already liked. That algorithmic curation was the very first step away from the collective radio hit and toward a highly individualized listening experience. The algorithm became the new radio DJ, but this DJ was broadcasting to an audience of exactly one.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the algorithm recommending human-made music, that was just phase one. Enter the AI disruption.
Phase 2.
Right. We are not just talking about machines suggesting songs anymore. We are talking about AI music generators like Suno, Udio, and Loudly. Suddenly, anyone, literally anyone with an internet connection and a keyboard, can create music from endless text prompts. You just type in a mood or a genre, and boom, you have a fully produced, ready-to-stream track.
The scale and the speed of this disruption cannot be overstated. It is completely unprecedented in the history of media.
Because it happened so fast.
If we look at previous technological shifts in the music industry, they moved at a glacial pace, relatively speaking. The transition from vinyl records to cassette tapes, from cassettes to CDs, and from CDs to MP3s, each of those shifts took decades to fully mature and penetrate the market. The industry had time to adapt its business models.
But the shift to AI.
The shift to AI took months. It happened practically overnight. Previously, if we look at the last big tech leap, digital audio workstations or DAWs software like Pro Tools or Ableton, they significantly lowered the barrier to entry. They reduced the need for massive, expensive analog studio time.
Right, you could suddenly record a hit indie album in your bedroom.
Exactly. But you still needed a powerful computer, hundreds or thousands of dollars in microphones and software plugins, and most importantly, you needed years of technical skill to understand compression, EQ, and mixing.
It still took real human effort.
A lot of it. Generative AI has dropped those production costs from thousands of dollars down to literally zero, or maybe a $20 monthly subscription. The average production cost for a major label pop track used to easily exceed $5,000 just for studio time and engineers, and it took weeks of fine-tuning. AI dropped the time to produce a track from weeks to literal minutes.
It is essentially a 99% reduction in production time and cost.
It fundamentally changes not just how music is made, but who is allowed to make it. The traditional pathway.
Okay, so let's dive into the real story of what is happening on the ground right now with these tools. Because when I first heard about AI music, I pictured, elevator music.
Beeps and boops.
Exactly. Weird, robotic, clunky synthesizer sounds. But these tools, like Suno, they are pulling incredible songs completely out of thin air. And the craziest part to me is the vocal generation. You do not need to know how to sing. You don't need a $3,000 microphone. You don't need breath control.
The machine does it all.
You just type a prompt, like write an upbeat, retro 80s synth-pop song about drinking iced coffee on a rainy Tuesday, and what you get back sounds like it was recorded by a professional session singer in a $1 million studio in Los Angeles. It has emotional inflection. It has soul.
And that perceived soul is what makes this current wave of technology so uniquely disruptive. What's fascinating here is how the general public is reacting to this incredibly convincing output. There was a highly revealing study conducted by Deezer and the research firm Ipsos recently.
Oh, right, the blind listening test.
They wanted to test this exact phenomenon. They played a variety of tracks for everyday listeners and asked them a simple question. Just identify which of these songs were made by humans and which ones were fully AI generated.
And I'm guessing people weren't very good at it?
Not very good is a massive understatement. A staggering 97% of listeners failed to accurately assess whether the tracks were AI or human-made.
Wait, 97%?
97%. Only 3 out of 100 people could reliably spot the machine.
That is insane.
The Turing test for audio has, for all practical intents and purposes, been entirely passed for the average consumer. If you were just listening casually while doing the dishes or driving, you cannot tell the difference anymore.
That is honestly terrifying.
But it gets weirder. Because the second layer of that Deezer and Ipsos study is even more telling about human psychology. Once the researchers informed the listeners that the incredibly catchy tracks they were just tapping their feet to were actually generated by an algorithm in a server farm, over 50% of them reported feeling actively uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable, like they felt tricked.
Exactly. It is a textbook example of the uncanny valley, but applied to audio. Usually we use that term for visual robotics or CGI when a digital face looks almost human, but something is just slightly off, and it triggers a deep psychological revulsion in our brains.
It's like those creepy early 3D movies.
Right. But with AI music, the uncanny valley hits after the fact. We love the sound, the rhythm triggers the dopamine in our brains, but once we are made aware of the synthetic origin, we are deeply unsettled. We feel manipulated.
That discomfort makes total sense. We want to believe there is a human being on the other side of the microphone feeling the same heartbreak or joy that we are feeling. But clearly, that psychological discomfort isn't stopping these AI tracks from absolutely blowing up online.
Not at all.
Yeah.
If anyone listening thinks this is all just theoretical, let's look at some specific examples from the research, because the proof is in the streaming numbers. Have you looked into the case of the Velvet Sundown?
The AI psychedelic rock band. Yes, it's a perfect case study. It is mind-blowing. So the Velvet Sundown is pitched as this moody underground psychedelic rock outfit. And this wasn't just a gimmick where someone uploaded one weird AI song. Within a matter of months, this AI entity released 3 full-length, sonically cohesive albums.
And listeners ate it up.
They amassed 1.4 million monthly listeners on Spotify. Their top song, a track called Dust on the Wind, crossed 2 million streams.
2 million streams for an artist that quite literally does not exist.
Right. Every single aspect of this band was hallucinated by a computer. The gritty film camera photos of the band members looking effortlessly cool, fake. Their detailed biographies talking about how they met in a dive bar, fake.
Completely fabricated.
And of course, every single guitar riff, drum fill, and vocal harmony was completely 100% generated by AI. Yet listeners totally embraced their catalog. They were adding them to their indie rock playlists right next to real human bands.
And the Velvet Sundown is not an isolated incident. We are seeing this across all genres. Look at the R&B space with Zanny Monet. This was an AI-powered R&B act created by an individual named Talusha Nikki Jones.
That's the one that hit the charts, right?
Yes. Zanny Monet didn't just quietly get a few thousand streams on a niche playlist. She charted on Billboard.
And AI made the Billboard charts. You really have to stop and absorb that.
Her track, How Was I Supposed to Know, actually entered the adult R&B airplay chart at number 30. And that chart placement wasn't just a vanity metric. It led to a very real multi-million-dollar record deal and 17 million U.S. streams.
That is just wild.
What you really have to understand here is the strategy behind these creations. These are not just random, faceless audio files being dumped onto a server with a generic title. The human operators behind these AI acts are using incredibly sophisticated storytelling.
They are building a world around the fake artists.
They are creating comprehensive branding, managing fake Instagram accounts, and writing deep lore to hook listeners emotionally.
So they are basically manufacturing the parasocial relationships that fans usually build with human pop stars.
Precisely. They are exploiting the human desire for narrative. If the music sounds flawless and the backstory is compelling, the average listener scrolling through their feed doesn't stop to run a forensic analysis on the vocal tracks to see if it's real. They just hit follow.
Which brings us right to the core issue of this whole deep dive, the personalized music bubble, or the echo chamber. Streaming platforms have fundamentally changed how they categorize music.
It's all about moods now.
Exactly. When you log into Spotify or Apple Music today, you aren't just looking through bins labeled rock or hip-hop or jazz anymore. You are looking for highly specific moods. You search for things like chill study beats or a late-night driving mix, angry breakup songs, or high-energy morning workout.
The platforms are perfectly set up to serve you a playlist that fits that exact specific micro mood.
It's what the industry calls contextual and hyper-personalization. The algorithms are constantly ingesting massive amounts of your personal data. They know the exact time of day you are listening. They track your geographic location.
They know your historical listening patterns down to the millisecond you usually skip a song.
They can even infer your perceived mood based on your recent activity. Like if you've been playing melancholic indie folk for 3 days, the algorithm knows you might be feeling down. They take all that biometric and behavioral data and use it to feed you perfectly tailored tracks.
From a marketing and user retention standpoint, it is absolutely brilliant engineering, but culturally,
Hmm.
the ripple effect is profound.
It really is, because think about the consequence of that. Instead of the major record labels pushing a few global stars to the top of the cultural conversation, we are all getting trapped in our own incredibly specific, personalized music bubbles.
We stop sharing the experience.
Right. If I am listening to an AI-generated lo-fi track that was specifically tailored to match my resting heart rate on a Tuesday morning, and you are listening to an AI-generated synthwave track tailored to your subway commute, we have absolutely nothing in common to talk about at the water cooler.
The shared touch points just evaporate.
Exactly. New human artists are struggling more than ever to break through because there is absolutely no collective focus anymore. How do you become the next Prince or the next Madonna when everyone's attention is splintered into a million different microgenres?
You can't.
We are literally trading shared cultural icons for isolated, perfectly optimized echo chambers.
Yeah.
It is disrupting the very idea of star power as we know it. We might never see another generation-defining superstar because the machine is too good at giving us exactly what we want individually.
It is a fundamental shift in the social utility of music. Music has historically been a binding agent for communities, for political movements, for entire generations. When you atomize the listening experience down to the granular individual level, and then you fulfill that individual demand with infinitely generated, hyper-targeted synthetic audio, the concept of a generation-defining artist begins to erode very, very quickly.
Why have a pop star for millions when you can have a pop star just for you?
You don't need a spokesperson for your generation when you have a private, infinite orchestra catering only to you.
Okay, but hold on. I want to play devil's advocate for a second. Hasn't pop music always been kind of manufactured? I mean, look at the boy bands of the 90s or the Motown hit factory in the 60s. Those were massive corporate machines churning out music designed to hit specific psychological triggers to make us buy records.
That's true.
Weren't those just analog versions of this exact same thing? Why is AI any different?
It's a very fair comparison. The music industry has always been a business of manufactured appeal. Motown had quality control meetings that were famously rigid. Max Martin mathematically engineered the perfect pop hook for Britney Spears and the Backstreet Boys.
Oh, it's always been a science.
But the difference now is the scale, the speed, and the complete removal of the human bottleneck. A factory still requires workers. Max Martin still had to sit at a piano, write the song, book the studio, and work with the artist. The AI removes the friction of time and human labor entirely.
It's instant.
It's the difference between a highly efficient assembly line and a Star Trek replicator that can instantly manifest whatever you ask for.
And to really grasp the scale of that replicator, we need to look at the facts. We need to ground this in the undeniable statistics and the economic realities laid out in our source material. Because the numbers here are frankly hard to wrap your head around. Let's look at the sheer volume of content flooding the gates right now.
It's a tidal wave.
The major platforms, specifically Spotify and Deezer, are dealing with an insane, unprecedented influx of synthetic audio. The reports show that between 50,000 to over 100,000 fully AI-generated songs are being added to these platforms daily. Every single day. Let me put that into a physical perspective so it actually means something to you listening. Imagine Madison Square Garden. It holds roughly 20,000 people. Adding 100,000 songs a day is like filling every single seat in Madison Square Garden 5 times over with brand new tracks.
It's incomprehensible.
And then doing it again the next day, forever. How does a human kid with a guitar compete with that?
They can't. The sheer volume is staggering, and it's accelerating. To contextualize that growth curve, our data shows that overall daily music uploads, human and AI combined, jumped from roughly 60,000 a day back in 2022 up to over 200,000 a day by 2026.
That is a massive jump.
That is a 233% increase in just a few years. And the platforms that are providing these generative AI services, they aren't hiding this. They are actively boasting about their massive output as a selling point to investors. The AI music platform Mubert publicly announced that its generative technology had produced 100 million songs.
100 million?
Yes. To give you an idea of how incredibly massive that is, 100 million songs is roughly equivalent to the entire historical catalog of Spotify, all of recorded human history, roughly 100 million tracks. and one single AI company matched that output.
That is just hard to process.
Furthermore, there was a fascinating detail in the UC Press study we reviewed. They noted an instance where a researcher took an early algorithmic music generator, recoded it using the Fortran programming language to optimize it, and was able to produce 1 billion songs in a single hour.
A billion songs in an hour. That breaks my brain.
When production capacity reaches 1 billion units per hour, the very fundamental concept of scarcity is obliterated. And scarcity is what has driven music economics for a century. A Beatles record had value because there were only so many Beatles records.
Right.
When music is as abundant as the air we breathe, how do you assign a monetary value to it?
But wait, if we're talking about a billion synthetic tracks hitting the servers or 100 million tracks from one company, how does anyone actually find anything? The platforms must be drowning in audio. Who decides what surfaces to the top of your feed?
That is the exact crisis the streaming companies are facing right now, because 95% of streamed music happens on playlists. Most people do not search for specific albums anymore. And who curates the vast majority of those playlists? AI and proprietary algorithms.
So the AI is generating the music, and a different AI is deciding which of that music gets placed on the playlist that you listen to.
Exactly. It's an automated closed loop. What actually gets picked to play for you during your workout might not even have had a human involved at any single step of the process, from creation to distribution to curation.
That feels like the matrix for music. So how are the platforms like Spotify and Apple handling this? They can't just let the servers fill up with infinite garbage.
They can't, and they have had to respond incredibly defensively to protect the integrity of their ecosystems.
Yeah.
Because if a user logs on and only hears robotic, nonsensical spam, they will cancel their subscription.
Nobody wants to pay for spam.
Spotify, for instance, had to quietly delete 75 million low-quality or spam tracks in a single year just to combat the flood of fraudulent, low-effort AI generation.
75 million tracks just wiped out.
It was a massive digital purge. And other platforms are taking different strategic approaches. Deezer has taken an even more aggressive public stance. They're actively working on building digital seawalls. They have implemented systems to actively keep fully AI-generated songs out of their algorithmic recommendations and out of their editorial playlists.
So they're trying to protect the humans.
They are doing this explicitly to stop synthetic music from completely drowning out human creators. They want to ensure that if an artist spends a year making an album, it doesn't get buried under 1 million tracks generated by a bot farm in 10 minutes.
And Apple Music.
Apple Music went as far as creating a specific premium tier or highlighting verified human artists. They're leaning into the human-made aspect as a premium artisanal quality. The streaming platforms are scrambling to maintain order.
And they are scrambling because the economic threat here is very, very real for everyone involved. Let's talk about the money. Record label revenue for traditional physical sales has obviously been dropping for a long time, about a 15% drop over last decade.
The writing has been on the wall.
And everyone in the industry knows the streaming payout model is deeply flawed for the creators. It pays fractions of a penny per stream. It simply isn't filling the gap for the average working-class musician. Now throw 1 billion AI songs competing for those same fractions of a penny into the mix.
The economic projections are deeply concerning for human creators. We need to look closely at the massive global economic study published by SciSac. That's the International Confederation of Societies of Authors and Composers. They represent millions of creators worldwide.
What did they find?
Their data suggests that by 2028, human creators risk losing 24% of their entire revenue to generative AI.
A quarter of their income just gone.
Exactly. And it's not just musicians. For audiovisual creators, it is a 21% risk. And for highly specific technical roles in the industry, like dubbing professionals and subtitling translators, an astonishing 56% of their revenue is at imminent risk of being automated away.
Wow.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the equation, the market for the AI-generated music itself is projected to absolutely explode. The SciSac study projects the overall market for Gen AI music and audiovisual content will rise from 3 billion euros up to an incredible 64 billion euros by 2028.
That is a staggering jump.
Now, it is important to note that different market analysts have varying methodologies for how they calculate these things. Another very comprehensive report we reviewed from the business research company values the AI in music market at $4.48 billion in 2025, projecting it to reach $12.86 billion by 2030, which represents a massive compound annual growth rate of 23.4%.
Okay, so whether you are looking at the 64 billion euro projection or the $12 billion projection, the core truth is the same. We are talking about a historic, multi-billion-dollar economic wealth transfer.
Precisely. It is a transfer of value away from traditional human creation, away from the musicians and the session players and the producers, and directly toward generative tech companies and server farms.
So when we talk about a 64 billion euro shift, what that actually means for you, the listener, is that the generic background music in your favorite video game, the upbeat soundtrack to your morning workout app, and the viral audio clips you hear over and over on your social media feeds, all of those are silently, aggressively being replaced by machines.
Because it's cheaper.
Right. Because why would a corporate brand pay a human producer $10,000 to score a commercial when they can generate a royalty-free track on Suno for 20 bucks?
From a purely capitalist efficiency standpoint, the humans simply cannot compete with the machine's margins.
And whenever billions of dollars are shifting that fast and entire industries are being disrupted, you inevitably get chaos. You get lawyers. Which brings us to the massive copyright chaos and legal battles happening right now. We absolutely cannot talk about AI music without digging deep into the famous Heart on My Sleeve incident.
Yes, the watershed moment.
Right. For anyone who might have missed it, Heart on My Sleeve was this incredibly viral deepfake track that popped up online. Someone used AI to perfectly, flawlessly mimic the voices of Drake and The Weeknd. They created an original beat, wrote original lyrics, and then mapped the AI vocal clones over it.
And it was incredibly convincing.
It sounded exactly like a leaked collaboration between two of the biggest artists on the planet. It had millions of streams on TikTok and Spotify before Universal Music Group absolutely panicked and hit it with massive copyright strikes to pull it down.
It was a cultural bomb going off in the music industry. Because before Heart on My Sleeve, AI music was still largely viewed by the major labels as a novelty. It was a toy for tech nerds. That track shattered the illusion.
It was a wake-up call.
It proved that the technology was capable of instantly replicating the most valuable commercial assets in the music industry, the unique vocal tone and cadence of a superstar.
Right, because if anyone can make a Drake song, what is the value of Drake?
Exactly, and this raises an important question. It introduced a legal nightmare that the industry is still desperately untangling here in 2026, because it raises a series of unprecedented questions for copyright law. First and foremost, were these AI tools trained on copyrighted music without the original artist's permission?
I mean, they had to be, right? The AI didn't invent what Drake sounds like out of thin air. It had to ingest thousands of hours of Drake's copyrighted albums to learn how to mimic him.
That is the core of the lawsuits. The generative companies argue it is fair use, akin to a human musician listening to a lot of Beatles records and then writing a pop song. They argue the machine is just learning. The record labels and artists argue it is massive, systematic copyright infringement and theft of their data.
And then there's the question of the output. When an AI generates a brand new song, who actually owns the copyright to that new file? Is it the user sitting at home who typed the prompt? Is it the massive tech company that built and owns the AI software? Or does some fraction of that ownership belong to the millions of human artists whose scraped work was used to train the neural network in the first place?
Traditional copyright law is fundamentally built on the premise of human creation. The legal frameworks simply were not designed to handle a machine that can ingest the entire history of recorded audio and spit out 1 billion derivative works in an hour. It is breaking the legal system.
And it's gotten so intense that it's actually reached Capitol Hill. This isn't just a squabble between music publishers in Los Angeles anymore. In a recent U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, lawmakers were looking directly at the regulatory impact of this technology. And one of the things that came up wasn't just copyright, but algorithmic bias.
Yes, the Martina McBride example.
Right. So during this hearing, and we're not taking a political stance here, just reporting what was discussed, they were exploring how these algorithms actually shape what we hear. A senator pointed out a highly specific example involving the country music artist Martina McBride. Someone had to refresh their Spotify recommendations 13 consecutive times before the algorithm finally served up a song by a female artist in that genre 13 times.
And that example perfectly illustrates why lawmakers are getting involved. Because the algorithmic bias issue, where an AI model might systematically marginalize certain demographics of artists, like female country singers, is a direct mathematical result of how these models are trained.
It's inheriting our past flaws.
If an AI is trained on historical radio data from the 1990s and 2000s, and that historical data heavily favored male artists, the AI doesn't know any better. It simply assumes that male artists are what the listener wants, and it mathematically optimizes for that bias, reinforcing and amplifying historical inequalities at scale. It's not necessarily malice. It's mathematical optimization of flawed data.
That makes total sense. If you feed the machine biased history, it will generate a biased future. And the hearing also brought up the reality of how these datasets are managed. They discussed the reliance on foreign labor specifically, what they call digital sweatshops in places like Kenya. These are facilities where workers are reportedly paid incredibly low wages to manually moderate and tag the massive, sometimes toxic datasets that feed these shiny, multi-billion-dollar AI models.
The inclusion of that in the Senate hearing highlights the complex global supply chain of artificial intelligence. We often think of AI as this magical, clean, ethereal cloud computing process. But the reality is that behind the algorithm, there is immense physical infrastructure, massive energy consumption, and often exploitative human labor required to clean the data so the machine can learn properly. It adds a profound layer of regulatory complexity to the economic chaos.
Which really brings us to the part of the deep dive where we need to step back from the raw data. We need to look at the philosophical and cultural implications of all these facts. We need to ask you, the listener, some direct questions about your own relationship with music.
The big picture stuff.
First off, think about this. If an AI is actively generating the music and a different algorithmic AI is curating the mood playlist that feeds it directly into your headphones, who is actually controlling the vibes? Are we just completely outsourcing our own personal taste to machines?
This touches on a brilliant concept from the research regarding what they call the bifurcation of discovery. We are seeing a massive split in how humans interact with audio in the modern era. On one side of the split, you have what is called lean-back listening.
Like putting on a playlist while you clean the house.
Exactly. It is entirely passive. You hit play on a Sunday morning chill playlist, and the algorithm takes the wheel completely. It reinforces narrow sonic patterns, feeding you exactly what its statistical models predict you will tolerate without hitting the skip button.
Just keeping you sedated, basically.
This leads directly to that algorithmic bias we just discussed, and a severe lack of diversity in what you hear. Your sonic environment becomes perfectly smooth, frictionless, and utterly unchallenging.
And the other side of the split?
The other side is lean-forward listening. This is active, community-driven, and highly intentional. It happens in niche Discord servers, in private fan clubs, on dedicated Reddit forums, and in physical record stores. This is where humans are actively sharing, debating, and curating music for each other.
Real human connection.
The profound danger of the passive, lean-back algorithmic model becoming the default for society is that we stop actively exploring. Your personal taste ceases to be a reflection of your human journey and instead becomes a mathematically optimized feedback loop designed by a corporation to keep your attention on their app.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate again because I know people listening are thinking this. Do we actually care as long as it sounds good? I mean, seriously, if you are at the gym, sweating it out, and a high energy, 140 BPM electronic track comes on that pushes you to run that extra mile on the treadmill, or on the flip side, if you are going through a devastating breakup and a melancholic piano track with a beautiful vocal genuinely makes you cry and process your emotions, does it fundamentally matter that a server farm in California generated it in 10 seconds instead of a human being pouring their heart out in a studio?
That is a tough one.
If the emotional result for the listener is identical, why does the origin matter?
That is the ultimate existential question. And it is to the very heart of the UC Press study we reviewed on artificial intelligence and musicking. The study rigorously contrasts the modern devaluation of music into mere sonic spam against the sociological concept of musicking.
Musicking, like music as a verb.
Precisely. The concept of musicking suggests that music is not just an audio file. It is an active, human, participatory process. It involves the creator, the performer, the listener, and the shared cultural context. There is a fantastic quote in the research from a scholar named Erot, who points out that historically, developing good taste used to require deep engagement, patience, and effort.
Right. You had to save up your allowance, ride your bike to the record store, talk to the weird guy behind the counter to get a recommendation, and then go home and listen to the entire album front to back while reading the liner notes. You invested yourself in it.
Exactly. You had skin in the game. You actively searched for music, you understood the cultural context of the artist's life, and you built a relationship with the art over time. Now, because music has been aggressively commodified into endless, frictionless data and content optimized for a scrolling feed, that human effort is entirely erased.
It's just background noise now.
When music is reduced to just being data designed to trigger a brief 3-second dopamine response before you swipe to the next video, we lose something profound. We lose the deep cultural connection that comes from knowing another human being with all their flaws and lived experiences poured their soul into the creation of those exact sounds to communicate with you.
That is a really beautiful way to frame it. But what does that mean for the human artists trying to survive right now? Is the idea of the global icon, the Beyoncé, the Drake, the Taylor Swift, is that era just permanently over? Are we heading into a dystopian future where human musicians simply cannot compete with an AI that never sleeps, never asks for royalties, and can write, produce, and release 1,000 hit songs a minute?
Not necessarily. In fact, our sources point to a very strong, very fascinating counter trend emerging as a direct reaction to all of this. Because the digital streaming space is being flooded with infinite synthetic sonic spam, there is actually a renewed, massive premium being placed on human-first branding.
Human first branding, meaning proving that you are a real person with a real pulse.
Exactly. Audiences are beginning to crave shared values, messy human backstories, and genuine flawed identities. They want to know the artist had a bad day or got their heart broken or has political beliefs. The machine cannot provide genuine vulnerability. And this craving for the tangible human element is exactly why we are seeing a massive counterintuitive comeback of physical media.
The vinyl boom.
Not just vinyl. Sales of CDs and even cassette tapes are surging in 2026. Listeners desperately want something tangible. They want an object they can hold in their hands, with physical artwork, that proves the music is real and permanent. It is a physical rebellion against the ephemeral, algorithmic, infinite stream.
I love that point so much. The sources actually mentioned an interview with Romain Bougrouche, who runs a company called We Are Rewind. They make modern cassette players. He was talking about how cassette tapes are making a comeback specifically because they force what he calls linear listening. You can't just casually hit a button and skip tracks if the intro is too slow. It's physically annoying to fast forward a tape, so you have to commit. You have to surrender to the artist's narrative and listen to the album exactly how they sequenced it. It forces you to be present.
It is the exact opposite of the hyper-optimized skip culture of streaming.
Mm.
And smart human artists are adapting to this cultural shift by focusing heavily on direct-to-consumer relationships. They are pulling away from relying solely on Spotify playlists. They are building their own private email lists and SMS lists. They are launching exclusive fan clubs on Discord.
The sources also mentioned micro-touring, which I found fascinating.
Yes. Instead of doing exhausting, scattershot national tours hoping people show up, artists are using streaming heat maps and direct data to book highly specific residencies. If they see they have a dense, highly engaged real-life fan base in Austin and Chicago, they will just play 5 nights in a small club in those specific cities. They are going out of their way to physically, in the real world, prove their humanity and build deep, unshakable bonds with their core fans.
So the competitive advantage for a human artist in 2026 is no longer just having a catchy, perfectly produced song, because an AI can do that instantly for free. The true advantage is having a dedicated community, having a firm stance on the world, having a vulnerability that a machine simply cannot authentically replicate. The independent artists who treat their fans as stakeholders in a shared, messy human experience are the ones who are actually building sustainable careers amidst this massive AI flood.
Precisely. The value proposition of music is shifting from the audio file itself to the human connection surrounding the audio file.
But even with that incredible human pushback, even with the cassette tapes and the Discord servers, we still have to wonder, on a macro level, are we stuck in our own personalized music bubbles forever? If everyone at your office or everyone sitting in the coffee shop right now is listening to completely different, micro-targeted, perfectly optimized tracks generated just for their specific biometric mood, does music ever truly unite us as a massive culture anymore? We are losing that incredible cultural touchstone of the true radio hit. You know, that one undeniable song that absolutely everyone knows the words to, the song that blasts out of every car window, the song that completely defines a summer. If we lose that shared experience, aren't we losing a major piece of how we connect with each other as a society?
If we connect this to the broader sociological picture, the fragmentation of the music industry is really just a reflection of society's broader fragmentation. Modern technology has given us the ultimate seductive luxury of a bespoke reality. You can curate your newsfeed, your social circle, and now your entire sonic environment to perfectly match your pre-existing preferences.
It's too comfortable.
But the hidden cost of a bespoke reality is profound isolation. The truly transcendent shared musical experience. The stadium concert where 50,000 strangers cry and sing the exact same lyric. The cultural earthquake when a massive album drops and the whole world reacts simultaneously on social media. Those moments require a shared cultural baseline. As algorithms continue to relentlessly hyper-personalize our audio environments, finding that shared baseline, that common language, becomes exponentially more difficult.
So what does this all mean? Let's bring all of these threads together for the wrap-up. The big takeaway from this deep dive is that artificial intelligence in music isn't just a cool new software plugin. It isn't just a new synthesizer or a fancier version of autotune. It is a foundational tectonic shift. It is fundamentally shaking up who gets to be a star, how we discover new songs, how money flows through a massive global industry, and even how we define what the act of musicking should be. The echo chamber scenario we open with, where you are listening to incredible AI music without even realizing it, isn't some dystopian sci-fi pitch for a movie. It is the absolute documented statistical reality of the music industry right now. The shift from a shared musical monoculture to isolated, highly personalized AI bubbles isn't coming in the future, it is happening in your headphones today.
To synthesize the overarching narrative from the mountain of data we've reviewed, the future of the music industry is not going to be a simplistic binary battle of AI versus human. It is going to be a highly complex, often messy integration of AI and human. We're already seeing the major record labels and streaming platforms adapting aggressively. They aren't just trying to ban the technology, they're trying to co-opt it. They're moving toward establishing ethical AI frameworks and licensing deals. Our sources frequently highlighted new initiatives, like the Soundverse Content Partner Program, which represents a fascinating middle ground. It aims to create a transparent opt-in system where human artists are actually paid royalties and compensated when their historical data and vocal likenesses are used to train these massive AI models. The fundamental definition of making music has permanently expanded to include prompting, curating, and training machines. The ultimate challenge for the industry, and for us as a society, is ensuring that the economic and deep cultural value of genuine human creativity isn't permanently lost inside the algorithm.
So here is our final call to you, the listener. The very next time you pull out your phone and hit play on Spotify, Apple Music, TikTok, or wherever you get your audio, take 1 second and actually look at the track details. Ask yourself, who or what actually made this beat that is making my foot tap? Is there a real human story behind these lyrics? Is there a person who lived and suffered and celebrated to write that melody? Or was it instantly spun up by a massive server farm in the desert to perfectly match your current heart rate and keep you engaged with the app for 5 more minutes? And ultimately, as we move further into this new reality, does it even matter to you anymore?
And I will leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over, building on exactly that point about biometric data. We already know that AI recommendation engines are meticulously tracking the time of day, your geographic location, and your historical listening habits to guess your mood and serve you playlists. But as generative AI models become infinitely faster, and as they become deeply integrated with the biometric wearables we all have on our wrists, our smartwatches, tracking our pulse, our temperature, our stress levels, how long until the algorithm doesn't just recommend a pre-existing song? How long until the AI literally changes the lyrics, dynamically alters the tempo, and shifts the singer's vocal inflections in real time, second by second, just to perfectly match your rising or falling heart rate as you run? And when the music becomes that perfectly, flawlessly tailored to your exact biological state in that exact millisecond, are you even listening to a piece of art anymore? Or are you just listening to a sonic reflection of yourself?